Special Operations, Covert Ops, Espionage, The Team House, with your hosts, Jack Murphy and David Park.
Hey everyone, welcome to episode 302 of The Team House. I'm Jack here with Dave, and our guest on tonight's show is retired CIA senior officer Pat Weninger. Pat had an amazing career with various assignments around the world, pretty much throughout the War on Terror, and some pretty cool stories actually that we're going to get into. But I got to do this ad here and tell you guys about our sponsor. So with the upcoming U.S. election, it's a pivotal moment for our country, and we've all got a responsibility to get out and vote. But there's another way to support your side before you even get to the polling station. Right now, you can back your candidate with a bet and win when they win. It's a trend amongst voters that is exploding in popularity, and we're getting in on it too at MyBookie. Honestly, could there be anything more American than putting your dollars behind your vote? Show your confidence with a straight bet on a winner of the election and choose from all kinds of fun prop wagers like what color tie will Trump wear? Spoiler alert, it's red. It's always red. The betting market for politics has a proven track record with the favorite to win in 4 of the last 6 elections, all cashing on the day of. Donald Trump opened as the favorite for MyBookie in 2016, and he again opened as the favorite this year. Harris currently has a slight advantage, but that can easily change with voters laying their bets. Listen, I can't tell you who will win the 2024 election for certain. What I can tell you is that I'll be putting my money on choose your preferred political candidate here, and with a book we trust. Don't miss out on this. Support your side. Use promo code TEAMHOUSE to double your first deposit and instantly start with a leg up, but only with MyBookie. And with that, we get into our interview for tonight.
Well, I think Vegas would put a line on just about anything. I think you just proved that point for me.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
exactly, man.
Absolutely.
So, Pat, I want to jump into, your entire story is interesting here from front to back, but even just starting with your origin story, start talking about, your upbringing, your father, obviously a huge presence in your life. And we would be remiss if we didn't mention your father recently passed away, and his name was George Weninger. He was a Special Forces legend, service in Vietnam and all over Latin America. And George and I used to talk over the phone once in a while over the last year or so. And your dad had some of the most incredible stories, I got to tell you. I'm sure you've heard them too, but.
Yeah, I've heard some of them. No, thanks for that. And first of all, thanks for allowing me to be here today. I'm super excited to be with you guys. I think, one of the reasons I like doing things like this, and I am somewhat selective. I don't have the public presence that some of my colleagues have, and that's nothing against them. It's just I choose to kind of do it in a more discreet way.
Sure.
Talking to universities and finding platforms where that align with my interests. And my interest is like, hey, the world is only getting more complicated. How by sharing my story can I potentially inspire folks to get into the national security space, whether it be with a uniform or without a uniform? And because the world is only getting more complicated, and what you guys do and the tremendous success that you guys have had, and the folks that you have on talking about their journeys and their stories, I think is in alignment with that. So thanks for having me, and thanks for the talking about my dad a little bit. Yeah, he just passed away a little over a month ago, and as you mentioned, he was a career Special Forces guy in for 35 years, and his story is super interesting, and it certainly plays into my origin story. I wouldn't be where I am today without him on many fronts. He was a young kid and 18 years old, and left Peru, born in Peru, came to the United States chasing the American dream, and raised his hand and joined the military in the late 50s, and wanted to serve the United States, wanted to become a citizen, and he achieved that. And through that path, really was interested in intelligence and special operations, and got into that path. Was posted in Europe, met my mom, who was French, French interpreter, speaks 5 languages fluently, amazing lady, and brought her back to the United States to start a family. And that started with me and my brother, and my dad subsequently, sponsored 2 of his 3 other brothers from Peru to come to the United States, and they all have built their families and grandkids. So he really was, kind of the patriarch of our family. So in that sense, he's going to be missed. But the other part of it was, he was a Green Beret, as you talk about, and served in Vietnam and several tours and Purple Hearts, multiple Purple Hearts, Bronze Stars with Valor, um, and really because of his background, his language skills, you know, was part of the seventh group based out of Fort Bragg and or Fort Liberty now. Sorry, it's hard to say. I'm sure it's hard for you guys too. And was involved in all the, the shadow wars in the 80s and early 90s in Central America. And I was very proud about that. So it was really cool to grow up with, my dad. He wasn't always there. He missed some key moments, and he regretted that. But he missed my high school graduation. He missed my commissioning when I got commissioned in the military because he was doing his thing, serving his country downrange in the tough spots. Um, so yeah, he's going to be missed. He really appreciated the interviews that you did with him, Jack, recently, and was able to tell a little bit about his story. So thank you for that. He was really happy about that.
It's my pleasure. My only regret is, I was planning to go down to Fayetteville to talk to him more in depth for a couple days, and that didn't happen, of course. But I am glad that I got to write a little bit about him and a little bit about his life, and maybe we'll do more in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Because some of his colleagues are still around.
Yeah, they are, and that was the cool thing about his wake and his religious ceremony. Was just some of the stories that were being told and how the SF community really rallied and presented themselves. Retired Major General Ed Reeder was really behind it, and it was really cool to see that. So it really made my family proud, and put his celebration in different light, as you can imagine, his celebration of life in a different light, with that special operations
Right.
influence. It was really cool how, they don't leave anybody behind and they take care of themselves, take care of each other. So that was evident.
Pat, a lot of times we talk about, when us pursuing the lifestyle that, the life that we dream of. Everybody will say thank you for your service, and whether that's for the military or the intelligence service, you're gone a lot and things like that. But it's also a life that you're choosing, right? It's a life that you dreamt of. It's a life that a lot of people admire and envy, and at the end of the day, we are also doing it for selfish reasons on top of, the service to the country and things like that.
Right.
So we talk about it from that angle about the people we leave behind. Can you talk about a little bit as like a kid growing up and
Yeah.
how that influenced your relationship and how that influenced your choices later on?
Yeah, absolutely. Great question, Dave. Thanks. It was an interesting time because when my dad missed a lot of those events, I remember having a lot of regret and really blaming the military. And there was a time in my life when I was young and impressionable where I wanted nothing to do with the military.
Right.
Um, and growing up in Fayetteville, going to a public school, everybody's parents
Yeah.
were in the military.
Hmm.
Every, all my friends, everybody was in the military. And I remember it was just the way of life. All the sports I played were on base at DYA. And we went to church on base, went to the hospital on base, went to the dentist on base. We never had an insurance card or anything. You just went on base. You purchased all the PX and the commissary. That was the life. And that was the only life I knew. So when I showed up in college as a young freshman at NC State, something clicked, and I joined ROTC, and my parents were shocked. And it was interesting for me, and I think part of it was when I showed up at NC State, I was, my circle of friends, they were from, all across the state and other states, and I just assumed that all their dads were in Vietnam and were in the military, and they were like, no, my dad's an accountant, my dad's a lawyer, my dad's this, my mom's this, my dad's a doctor, my mom's a doctor. So I saw a different perspective where there wasn't this sense of service that had, unbeknownst to me, been instilled in me along the way,
Uh,
you know? And it was there subliminally. I just never realized it. And quickly, I was like, this seems really odd. If nobody here is going to serve, I have to serve. So that's why I joined ROTC, and my parents were shocked. But it's a great question, and it goes back to my dad. That as much regret that I had where he missed certain parts of my life, I had a greater appreciation for what he was doing. And that appreciation grew significantly through my career, both in the military and when I was in the agency. There was a couple of touch points where, and I can talk about those as we talk a little bit about my career. I'll remember to bring it up, where his world, the special ops world, intersected with what I was doing, and people were like, "You're George's dad?" And I would start hearing the stories, and some of the respect came out, and you saw the respect for him.
yeah.
It was super, which in my mind, as I got older, made all those, those regrets that I had when I was a young man just go away.
Yeah.
And it switched to pride.
Yeah. I know you said you blamed the military. Did you and your father have a good relationship as you
Oh
were
yeah,
growing up?
we had a great relationship.
Good. Yeah.
Because he was very good to me and my brother and my mom, gave us everything we ever wanted, instilled good values in us. Um, he was a staunch conservative during the Reagan eras, and that's when I was growing up, the very impressionable time. He was all about service before self and country. And I remember as a kid driving on base at 5 o'clock, and all the cars stop on base, and everybody gets out of their car for reveille,
Yeah.
when the flag's coming down.
Yeah.
That was normal, right? That's just how it was. And I hope there's still that now. And again, it goes back to my first point that I raised, is that one of my goals is to share my journey and somehow hopefully inspire people to kind of get into this space, because you guys know we need people. We need smart people. We need good people.
Yeah.
Retention rates are down, recruitment rates are down. And I think there's a void there, and people are missing that sense of service before self.
Mm.
So, to your parents' shock, you joined ROTC in college, and you commissioned in the Air Force, right?
Correct. Yeah, I came in, and I was somewhat like, I don't want to go in the Army, because the Army for me was,
Fort
I want to
Bragg.
serve, but it was like you're going to be gone all the time.
Yeah.
And I understood the brunt of that. That ended up doing that in CIA. And the Fayetteville life, the pawn shops, the used car dealerships, all that. It was just like,
Yeah.
there's got to be something better than this, a better version of this. And I wanted to fly. And I joined ROTC because I wanted to become a pilot. I wanted to fly A-10s. I was growing up, every year we'd go to the CAPEX demonstration at Fort Bragg, and every summer they'd shut the base down for 4 days. I don't know if you guys remember this or not. And they do a capabilities demonstration, and they bring in tanks and planes, and you sit there in the crowd, and they open it up to the public, and they're dropping bombs and doing assaults. And that left an impression on me. I was like, I want to fly one of those A-10s. And I was on track to do that. And summer before my junior year, I was actually working at a golf course in Fayetteville in the summer to make some extra money, and had a really bad accident. I wasn't like, I was the one of the guys that raked the traps and aerated the greens, and I had to be there at 6 o'clock in the morning and clean I was the maintenance team on the golf course, not somebody working in the country club with a polo shirt.
I had that job too at that age.
Yeah, but there was this really bad golf cart. It's kind of a funny but tragic story, and it ended up changing my life. I was going down this steep hill, and there was a lot of play in the wheel, and this big hose and big thing on the back where you'd aerate and water down the greens, and the cart flipped, went over a bump. I was going really fast. It flipped, or it got sideways and started to flip. I jumped out, and it rolled, and it landed on me and broke my ankle, and I'd have a metal plate and 5 screws put in. So that was in early summer. I showed up in the fall at ROTC and I report in. I tell them what happened. They're like, "You lost your pilot slot. In fact, you can't be an ROTC with a metal plate in so you're out."
Wow.
So they're like, "If you get the plate out, come back and see us." So I had to wait a year. The plate came out. It pushed my graduation, my commissioning date back a year. Went back into the program. They only gave me a navigator slot. And they're like, "Well, we'll try to upgrade you. We don't have a slot right now." This was in 1990, 89, 90. And then my senior year, the Gulf War happened. In the lead up to the Gulf War, if you guys recall, there was a big concern about the Iraqis and their capability where we had overestimated. And they're like, "Okay, we got to get a lot of people in the pilot pipeline. You're getting upgraded to a pilot." Great. Fantastic. And then, the war was over in what, a week? And then the military came back and they're like, "Well, we're gonna downsize." So I was supposed to graduate and get commissioned in the end of May, and they call us in less than a month before graduation. And they said, "Okay, the military's downsizing. All of you have lost your pilot slot except 2 people. If you don't want to get commissioned, you don't have to, even if you're on scholarship, whatever. You don't have to pay the money back. You don't have to enlist. You can walk. But if you want to get a commission still, you can, but it's going to be in one of these 3 career fields: security, aircraft maintenance, or intelligence." And I was like, "Well, I don't know anything about any of those, but I what are the intel guy?" And they do all the secret spooky stuff. It's kind of cool, and you have to have a clearance. And I was like, "I'll do that." So, that broken ankle, pushing my graduation date out to the right a year really changed my course. Because if I would have graduated on time, I would have went into, probably would have went into pilot training
Yeah.
a year early. So that kind of changed the course of my life without me even knowing it. And then the next thing I know, I get commissioned. I'm off to Intel school in the Air Force down at Goodfellow Air Force Base. And it was like a year or so, and you're not doing human or anything sexy. You're basically understanding the threats to pilots, whether they come from the air or the ground, and being able to articulate that and brief that. And, but what it did teach you was, hey, here's the role. Here's what classified information looks like. Here's what it is. Here's how you handle it. Here's how you engage, pilots, quote unquote, operators. I use that term loosely a little bit. And here's the threats you need to know about, both geopolitically and militarily, that you need to be on top of. And, so it was a great way to kind of, get into the military, understanding classified information, learning about the world. And, I was assigned to an air unit, and I was their first intel officer, and everywhere they went TDY, they dragged me along. I went everywhere. I was in Cairo West Air Base. I flew down to Mogadishu right after, the Black Hawk down. They took me all places in the Middle East, Pacific. It was fun. And I was a young, 22, 23-year-old kid, with some responsibility, and suddenly have NCOs with, 15 years of experience working for me. I got a chance to learn about leadership and responsibility, but also about the world.
Yeah.
Which started feeding into this, okay, I'm starting to understand why my dad did this, kind of thing. So it was fantastic for me as a young officer.
And the Air Force town, I assume that it wasn't plagued by pawn shops, check cashing joints, and strip clubs.
Not to the not to the level of Fort Bragg and probably Fort Benning. Not to those levels. I love Fayetteville. Not to say anything bad about it. I love Fayetteville, but again, as a young guy, that's kind of how you viewed it,
Yeah, for sure.
And so tell us a little bit about how things go on as a Air Force intelligence officer, and how you started working with JSOC too at that time.
Yeah, kind of a funny story. Like, I was in Panama. I was posted in Panama, so that was the other thing. That's another funny story where I found out I was going to Panama, and the NCO in charge of personnel calls me, kind of as as my sponsor to talk to me, to tell me about things I need to think about before I get to Panama. And I was in Panama from 94 to 96. And this NCO, he's like, sir, and I think I was a first lieutenant. And he's asking all these questions, very formal. At the end, he goes, sir, do you mind if I ask you a personal question? And I was like, yeah, go ahead, man. And he goes, are you married? I was like, no, I'm single. He's like, this is a man's paradise. You're gonna love it down here. So that was a great tour. I got to work at Southcom that's when it was still in Panama, not in Miami before it moved. And again, that was my first time working at a big command out of a tactical unit, and working in a joint environment. And there was a major there that had worked in the special operations community, in the tiered community, and he would tell stories, and I'm like, wow, that sounds really interesting, and kind of gave me this bug about it in my head. And there were some jobs opening up that were really strange, that had these, in Air Force parlance, were data masked, these secret jobs, and I started applying for them. And one thing led to another. Next thing I know, I'm flown back from Panama for an interview, and they don't tell you, what unit you're working with, who you're working. You just very one-sided interview, and should you accept the job, then you'll get read into, but you kind of have an idea. So I ended up making it through that interview, and got an opportunity to work with the command in one of the tiered units as a young intel officer, which was cool. But at the same time, I had to move back to Fayetteville. So it was that. So I'm back to, that's why I caveated. I said I love Fayetteville, and came back and rented a house and not far from where my parents were living. And my dad had retired at that time, so he was super excited. And all my friends would come over. My dad, he was a fantastic cook, would make us lomo saltado and serve us, great meal every Sunday night. And it was a good time in my life, but it introduced me to this, this tiered community, and how they do things, and the difference between the specialty and the, just the machine behind it, the 0300 package, and all that, and how that works, as compared to Big Blue Air Force or Big Green Army. You know what I mean? It's like night and day, as you guys know, and nothing against that. That's where I came out of, the Big Blue Air Force. It was a great place to learn about myself and being a young military officer, but it's just a different world. And it was a fantastic experience. And it started exposing me to the folks in Langley a little bit.
And how did your job change in your? So at first you were just sort of doing the knowing all about the air threats available to pilots. Did you start taking on a lot of new stuff in this new position?
Yeah, so it was then, it was being kind of the senior intel guy for an element, and within the command, and you had a team, and you're integrated into the tiered society, if you will.
Yeah.
And that machine, and it was really cool, and you get exposed to stuff. But if you recall, at that time, again, pre 9/11, the Clinton years, there was not a lot of real world deployments going on.
Right.
And the command was really, the battle rhythm was around the quarterly JRXs, right? And those were the big exercises every few months that we did to keep the pointy end of the spear sharp.
Right.
But it just wasn't being used, and there was a lot of frustration in the ranks.
Yeah, like you guys at the time, if I got the timeline right, I mean, they were pretty much looking at like Haiti, Libya, a couple other things, stuff that never got off the ground, really.
Yeah, it was that there was not a lot of policy support to use that instrument of power within the United States government. So it was, it was cool, and you got to do neat stuff that and you got the coolest pagers, and if you had the coolest pagers, you were on a 1 hour hook. If you got the beep, and I'm dating myself a little bit. You guys know this, and you got to travel different. You had blanket orders. You could do whatever you want. It was just a different, it's a very different experience than kind of the regimented, military um, way they do things. But it was exposure into that world, which also exposed me to the agency,
Yeah.
which is where that little nugget started to, in the back of my head, was like, wow, that's kind of cool.
Yeah.
So I'll ask you about how you jumped ship and applied for the CIA. Got to tell you, our viewers, about our next sponsor for tonight, Ketone IQ. This is a high performance energy drink, and I actually used this on a recent trip to Kyrgyzstan and Kazakhstan, and I was super jet lagged, but also wanting to go hiking out in the woods and horseback riding and all this other fun stuff to do. You have a limited amount of time on your vacation, and Ketone actually helped me get over some of the jet lag, kept me going through the day. So I threw a box of this in my rucksack, and it definitely helped get me through that trip. Ketone, I should also mention they have, this was actually developed for special operations in a lot of ways. And they developed it for some of the mountain teams, the high altitude guys, because the ketones help oxygenate the blood. And so that's what helps, the performance and the resilience and able to, keep going every day. They also work with top Olympic athletes like Des Linden and Michael Andrews, to Ironman world champion Sam Laidlow. They just launched a supplement and research partnership with Team Visma Lisa Bike, the top pro cycling team in the world, winning the last two Tour de France's in 2023 and 2022, and swept all three Grand Tours this past year. I should also point out there are two different versions of this. This is Ketone IQ. Also has, I believe, 100 milligrams of caffeine derived from natural green tea. So this is the caffeinated version. And then there's the other, just the ketone version that is not flavored and does not have caffeine in it. So you can go and check out those. You can save 30% on your first subscription order and receive a free 6-pack of Ketone IQ by going to ketone.com/teamhouse. That's ketone.com/teamhouse. Over to you, Dave.
And thanks to our third sponsor tonight, it's a product I love. I am a super hot sleeper. The house has to be 68, and I have to have a fan on me just to try to get to sleep, and I still wake up sweating half the time. If you sleep hot at night like I do, you know just how disruptive it can be. Whether you're having trouble falling asleep, you're waking up sweating in the middle of the night, or all the above. And if you have to take your pillows out to the back porch to dry them out each morning, that's where GhostBed can help. As the makers of the coolest beds in the world, GhostBed is your go-to for the cooling mattress, cooling pillows, and even cooling bedding. From their signature Ghost Ice fabric to patented technology that adjusts with your body temperature, every GhostBed mattress is designed with cooling in mind. So whether you want a plusher mattress that cushions your shoulders and hips, or a firmer option with exceptional support, your GhostBed will keep you cool and comfortable all night long. When you purchase a GhostBed mattress, your comfort is guaranteed. You can try out your mattress for 101 nights risk-free and make sure it's the right fit for you. Plus, they offer free shipping, and most items ship within 24 hours. If you're not sure which GhostBed is for you, check out their mattress quiz. You'll answer a few questions to get your personalized recommendation, or reach out to their friendly team of sleep experts for all the help you need. Even better, Team House listeners can get 50% site-wide for a limited time. Just visit ghostbed.com/house and use code HOUSE at checkout. Again, that's ghostbed.com/house with a code HOUSE at checkout to save a whopping 50% off site-wide. Pat, back to you. Sorry about that.
Thank you for your patience
Yeah.
there, Pat. So through your work with JSOC, you get exposed to the interagency process. I imagine the CIA liaison officer How does this idea start to germinate in the back of your mind about maybe joining the agency?
It's kind of an interesting story, which I think I can tell. Yeah, I'm pretty sure I can. So we were planning this op. JSOC was had a planning cell and kind of an AFO team that worked on the planning cell. And I can't remember how I got looped into that to be part of the planning team. And it was overseas to kind of do a sensitive CT op. So my boss comes to me, he's like, "Hey man, we need somebody to go to the agency and talk to them about it, but um, this is a really sensitive kind of bigoted list thing. You can't talk to them about it, but I want you to try to go up there to see if you can solicit if we need to leverage them to support this and talk about and get a better understanding of what their capabilities are, but you can't talk about the op." I was like, I get to go to the agency? So, through the ADMA office, I go up there and I got my uniform on. I show up and I have an office call with the chief of staff to the counterterrorist center. A really good guy, who was a legend, by the way, in the CE world. And knock on his door, kind of report, and he's like, "Come on in." So on my calendar, what can I do for you? And I'm like, I'm Captain Weninger. I'm from JSOC. We have this operation. But I can't really talk about it, but I need your help and blah, blah, blah. And looking back, like how ignorant was I to go into his office and kind of say that. And he's like, "Well, young man, I don't think we're going to be able to help you much. But, thanks for coming. If I don't know what you're doing, then I really can't help you," and yada, yada, yada. And kind of kindly escorted me out of his office after a few minutes. So I meet a friend of mine for lunch. I'm in the lunch hall at the agency. I'm like, "Man, that didn't go well. I can't go back with that answer." I was like, "To hell with it." So I go back after lunch, knock on his door. I was like, "Hey, look, I'm sorry. There's some sensitivities about, this, and I'm new to this, working with you guys. Here's the deal. Here's what we're going to do. Here's what we're trying to do." And I told him. And kind of took a risk. And he's like, "Look, you can trust me. I understand. That's great. We can absolutely help you guys." So he started talking to me about all the different things and setting up meetings for me to talk to people about how, again, pre 9/11, that
Right.
integration of JSOC and CIA was not there.
Right.
And they were sending, young, naive, you know, officers like me up there to make a fool of themselves in front of later I found out how this guy was a legend. And, he said something to me at the end of the day. He was like, "Hey, we have this course that we do that's really for us and a few FBI peoples. What if I sponsored you to be the first kind of JSOC DoD guy to come through it? And through this course, you'll be able to understand the capabilities of the counterterrorist center." And I was like, "Hey, that sounds great. I'd love it." He's like, "All right, I'll set it up." So went back to my boss. He was like, "Wow, you're going to go to a course and represent, Jason? That's great." And I go, "Yeah, I'll be the first. And, maybe they'll let folks come in after me. And this will be, we'll help with that integration." So I ended up coming to the course. It was one of their sensitive offsites. Super cool. I was the only the first DoD guy, JSOC guy to be in the course. And they treated me really well. And it was a week long, and afterwards, it was very collegial and all the agency folks that were coming in talking about, how the CT center operated. Everybody's drinking and there's a social scene and stuff. And folks start talking to me like, "Hey man, you ever thought about applying for us?" And I was like, "To do what?" And like, "Be a case officer." And I was like, "Well, I thought I thought you had to be an Ivy League grad. I went to NC State." I was like, "No, man, that's like, that's from the days gone by. Like, do you have a resume?"
Skull and bones.
I know. Like, I was like, "Do you have a resume?" I was like, "No, I'm in the military. I don't have a resume." And it put one together. So one thing led to another, and put a resume together and got an offer, got an opportunity. And it takes a little bit of time, and it's not an easy process. It's purposeful, and it's very competitive. And I remember going through and it's a series of interviews that culminate with a series of interviews in Washington. If you make it to Washington, I learned after the fact if you go through the several gates you have to go through, you eventually, you're doing in-person interviews along the way in different locations. And if you make it to Washington, you probably have a 60-70% of getting a conditional offer. And I remember I made it all the way to Washington, and one of the interviewers asked me, and they said, some of the standard interview questions. And he said, I was completely bought in. I was like, this is what I want to do. You know what I mean? And one of the interviews questions, what is your greatest success? And he says, what's your greatest failure in life? And I remember this kind of distinctly. And I said, well, it hasn't happened yet. The guy was like, well, what do you mean? I said, if I don't make it through this process. And he's like, that's the first time I heard that, man. And for whatever reason, I think that impacted this guy. And they were able to let a guy like me, a kid from Fayetteville who went through public schools, who went to NC State, didn't have an advanced degree, and gave me a shot. And I'm grateful for that they gave me an opportunity where I didn't really think, I wasn't sure I'd make it through, because it is a very competitive process. And I say that with all humility. But that kind of set me on my way, and I had a conditional offer of employment. And of course, that's shrouded in secrecy where you can't talk to people about it. Understood? That's purposeful. And then I go back to my office at JSOC. Of course, I've told nobody anything. Like a week later, they tap me on the shoulder and they're like, hey, man, you've been picked to go be the aide de camp to the new 3-star commander of AVSOC. You're PCS into Hurlburt Field. And I was like, what? And they're like, aren't you excited? Like, they picked you. And I'm like, well, I didn't apply. Like, no, man, the commander came down. He's like, you're going. This is great. This is a path to become a senior officer in the military. And they were like, you don't seem very excited about it. And, I couldn't say anything. And I was like, no, this is great. Inside, I wasn't sure what to do. And by the way, there was a stop loss going on at the time because of the Kosovo War. So you couldn't get out. So I ended up PCS into Hurlburt, became the aide-de-camp to this great 3-star general, good guy. I didn't know what an aide-de-camp did. I didn't understand that at all, but it was, you're basically the right-hand person. You guys know this for a general officer, and you kind of get to sit on, on bended knee, if you will, and see how, these 3- and 4-star, generals operate, and how they drive mission, how they manage and lead. And it was a super interesting time for me. But in the back of my mind, I have this conditional offer, and the agency's calling me every couple months. It's like, okay, we got a class starting. You're ready to start, the case officer training. And I said, I can't get out. There's a stop loss. And they're like, well, we're going to give you one more window. If you can't get out by then, we're going to pull the offer. So about 6 months through my 1-year aide-de-camp tour, the general brings me in. He's like, all right, Pat, I'm going to give you some feedback. You're half to your point. You're doing a good job. When you finish up, we're going to put you in this, leadership class and give you a command, and you got the pathway to colonel. And it was a one-on-one meeting. And I had talked to the building, and I said, can I tell this one person that I need to get out and maybe he can help? And they're like, yeah, we'll authorize you to tell this one person, which is kind of funny, right? And so he's in this story. He's like, well, he's kind of giving me this guidance and this professional feedback. And I was like, hey, I want to get out. He's like, what? And he's like, what do you mean? I was like, yeah, I want to get out. And he said, why? You got a great path ahead of you. You're a good officer, And I said, look, you can't tell anybody. And I kind of give him this whole story that's been directed at me. And I say, I got this offer to go work at the CIA. And he's like, to do what? And I was like, to be a case officer. And he's like, what's that? And I explained, I was like, the guys go out and recruit. They're the ones, recruiting and handling agents and yada, yada, yada. He's like, well, what are you waiting for? That sounds great. And, I said, well, it's funny you ask. And I said, I got to be honest with you. It's like, I can't get out because of stop loss, but I got to be frank. I wasn't sure to do it. And this wasn't a fib, and it was true at the time. There was a part of me was like, hey man, you do have a path forward in the military. You have worked, I've been in for 8 years now. That's, you're almost halfway to potential retirement, and you've set yourself up. You kind of, for whatever reason, you've been able to rise to the top of that crest of that wave, and you can ride that for a while potentially and have a really good life and a really good career. And stepping into this unknown, truly unknown unknowns, right? They don't tell you anything. You go into the job with your eyes wide shut. You really don't know what you're getting into until you're into it, the agency. And you're gonna have to start over. So I kind of laid that out for him. I was like, hey, look, I really want to do it, but I have some hesitation. And he said, all right, and this is, I owe this man a lot of credit. He's like, let me tell you something. He's like, first of all, you don't have to wear a uniform to serve your country. And I was like, wow, when he said that, like this, like what a great comment. Like this burden just lifted off me immediately. And he's like, let me tell you the second thing. He's like, this is the Air Force, not the intelligence force. He's like, look, I fly gunships, AC-130 gunships, and there's a pecking order. There's the fighter pilots, then guys like me, then guys that fly cargo planes, then navigators, then weather officers, then the maintenance officer, then the intel guy. And he said, who's the head of Air Force intelligence right now? And I said, Brigadier General so and so. And he goes, he's a pilot. You ain't. So I was like, well, you're right. I think I want to get out, but I need your help. I was like, what do you need my help for? I was like, I can't get out because of the stop loss. And he knew that. And he's like, okay, well, what can I do? And I was like, you tell me. And he's like, I'll call the head of Air Force personnel right now. He's a 2-star general. I think his name was Tex Brown. I can't remember his name. So I was like, but you can't tell him anything. How naive I was. You can't say anything. And sure enough, he's like, go get the Stu 3, right? So I go get the Stu 3, hook it up right in front of him. I call, and because this guy was a 3-star, I get the 2-star on the line. I was like, hey, my 3-star's calling, put the 2-star. The 2-star's like, her, my 3-star wants to talk to you, gets on the phone. And they're having this conversation in front of me, and I'm only hearing one side of the phone call. And he says, hey, I got a favor, Tex. I got a young guy here. I need to get him out. And I can't really go into it, but it's for national security purposes. And then they're kind of going back and forth. And he looks at me, he's like, what's your social? And I write it down on a yellow sticky, and I hand it to him. And then he's like, okay, thanks, Tex. And I get off the phone. And then he looks at me, he's like, somebody's going to call you. I'm like, but it's going to get taken care of. And then like 2 days later, I get this phone call. And this colonel, he's like, hey, is this Captain Weninger? And I was like, yeah. And he's like, I don't know who the hell you are, but I'm supposed to get you out of the Air Force. And that was it. He got me out. And I got out on a Friday and started on a Monday at the agency.
At I don't know if you're allowed to say the name, but America's premier tradecraft espionage training course, right?
Correct.
Yeah. So how did that experience go? And now you're training. I mean, it's interesting that you were essentially an intelligence briefer and planner. It sounds like
exactly.
Now you're becoming the practitioner.
That's exactly right. And it was there's a little bit of, when you look around the room when I showed up, as far as my class goes, there's some of my best friends, really bright people. People that were very accomplished, much more than me in the room. People with PhDs, lawyers, people with, hard military skills, accountants, people that spoke 5 languages, hard languages. And I'm looking around the room and I'm saying, I'm not the smartest guy in the room here. It was very apparent to me. So I took it as a challenge, say, I really need to try to overachieve if I'm going to make it through this and focus on, the task at hand, because it's competitive. It's not easy, it's not. And I say that with all humility. It's not. There is a weed out process, just like any of these, professional courses, whether it be in special ops or anything else. There's a weed out process, and you are under the mic. They are watching you the whole time. So it's very stressful, but at the same time, you learn a lot. You learn a lot about yourself, And you make some great relationships along the way.
Tell us about, after you graduate, a little bit about pre 9/11 CIA, sort of like what that experience was like for you.
Yeah, so that great question. I mean, you come into the place at the time, again, pre 9/11, and it's hey, we need you to recruit Russians and Chinese and Iranians and North Koreans. And it's very hard target, classic intelligence, traditional intelligence, kind of the Cold War theme that you and tactics, techniques, and procedures, if you will, that you're being trained on, right? But those skills are, you can just about drop you anywhere and you could do it, right? And so that was kind of the mentality. And I finished the training, prior to 9/11. So again, still in that mindset, was super excited to make it through, and learned a lot and felt really comfortable with what I had been taught, and was ready to go execute that mission, and felt very prepared, and armed with the right tradecraft, the mindset, and the understanding of kind of the environment of where you were going and what you needed to do. And then 9/11 happened, and everything changed. Changed. That I was in Washington that day, and it was a very powerful, dramatic day, but the transformation that happened within the organization overnight was real, and you could see it. Immediately went on war footing.
And you pretty soon found yourself in an undisclosed South Asia country.
Yeah. So yeah, my career, again, as I mentioned, kind of came in with that classic, you're going to go after hard targets kind of mentality. And then that was a game changer. And suddenly, not unique to me, a lot of people became CT officers, and, there was a ramp up time, but I soon found myself, after a little bit of time in South Asia, in a very austere, difficult environment, as a very young officer in a paramilitary austere environment.
Yeah.
And in a very violent place, a dangerous place, which was a fantastic assignment, which was, that's where the mission was, and that's where I wanted to go. And I wanted to, I think there was this broader sense in the organization, that, there was a black eye. And it wasn't unique to us. I think the FBI felt that way. I think we felt that way, and people took it personally. And, that sense of service that had been instilled in me by my dad early on, had really grown over time. And that watershed moment of 9/11 just put it on steroids. And that's where I want to be. I raised my hand, and that's where I wanted to go. I wanted to go to the toughest place and do that mission and be part of that team that was forward. So I had the opportunity to do that. And it was a fantastic experience in many ways.
Any stories that you're able to tell from those early years of the war?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a super interesting environment when you're dropped in as a quote unquote line case officer, and you're not a paramilitary officer, and you're suddenly in a paramilitary environment. The organization did train you. I mean, before I went, I got some, non-standard training of how to operate in that environment. As you guys can imagine, the shoot, move, communicate, the tactics, in very short order. How to get off the X, all those different things, how to manage tactical secure radios, crypto, all those things. You get the medical piece of it, pounded into you very quickly, the ABCs, all that. And when I arrived, I remember my first day thinking, wow, this is real. And, you're going to see, I remember I landed in country. I was in the capital, and I had to go see the COS. And I walked into this COS's office, this legendary COS, guy by the name of Greg Vogel, and he'd know me from Adam. And he said, "Hey man, come in, sit down. Where are you going?" And I told him. He's like, "All right, you're going to see some shit there." He goes, "Here's my guidance." And he looked at me and he said, "You ready?" I'm like, "Yeah." And he's like, "Kill Al Qaeda. Any questions?" He's like, "No, chief." He's like, "Be safe and take care of your people." That was it. And I was in the helicopter that night. That was it. Push down range. And it was a super interesting experience where there's this balance of how do you execute an FI mission in a paramilitary environment? You're teamed with a couple other case officers and a paramilitary team and paramilitary resources and indigenous resources, and you're trying to get to places where you can collect strategic intelligence as well as tactical intelligence on Al Qaeda senior leadership in an environment where everybody's trying, you're getting attacked every night. You're getting, rockets, mortars, just on a nightly basis. Every time you go outside the wire, there's a threat of IED. But the thing that I found interesting about that environment was how to operate and move in that environment. There was kind of this sense of the analogy I give to it is kind of blue states, red states, and swing states, if you will. You kind of had this perimeter of villages that was right outside your wire that were your blue states, if you will. And then you would always try to push to the swing states that were being influenced by, as some of my colleagues or some of the locals, they call them the miscreants, term that they use, but the extremists were influencing those. But those swing states were still vulnerable to our American influence. And, hey, let's do a med cap. Let's bring in coats for the winter. Let's try to make sure that we're able to push our sphere of protection out to protect them and give so that the bad guys can't influence them, and then have a tactical lily pad one step closer to where we're at, where we are now we're under more danger, and we can't do our mission to collect intelligence on Al Qaeda senior leadership. How do we keep pushing out our wire? And then there's the red states beyond that, right? That are, hey, there's nothing you can do. They're bad areas. If you're going to get out there, if you're going to be in there or near there, you're getting into a firefight.
Right.
And, so navigating that environment to collect intelligence, recruit people, and run sources through that gate, through those wickets, is an interesting challenge. And the story of what happened in Coast with the triple agent, highlights some of those threats.
Yeah.
Where we lost 7 officers. That meeting they had was a very, I'm not downplaying it, but it was that type of meeting where there's a lot of unknowns with unvetted people, where you're trying to determine if they have information or not, was very common amongst all, in that part of the world, no matter what side of the border you were on, no matter where you were at.
Out of curiosity, so you mentioned FI, and when you say that, for listeners who might not be familiar, it's foreign intelligence. You mentioned that the CIA ramped up pretty quickly. Did you see any type of reluctance or resistance to this idea of we're the people who go to embassies, or we're the people who go to these parties, we're the people who go to universities. We're doing this strategic mission, and now they want us in this tactical environment. And because you were military and you were Air Force, you weren't, a Green Beret, but you were Air Force. You
Not a
still
door kicker. Wasn't a door kicker. Never was. Never would be.
right,
Yeah.
but you were still Air Force, so you still had some military bona fides. Did that play into them to the whole? We're looking for people to go out and manage these bases.
No, at the time, I don't think it did, and that's a
Uh-huh.
great question. But there was this, I think over time as the kind of the war zone ramped up in the early 2000s, the war zone environments, and there were several, as you know, or a couple, should I say a couple, as you know, as they ramped up, there was a group of people that were raising their hands that would go and bounce between them, and I ended up, it wasn't unique to me. I enjoyed that. My career was defined by that,
Uh-huh.
for good or for bad. And there were some people that, because of their family situation or their background, viewed it differently. And I'm not saying anything against them. But there was a requirement over time for every case officer to do at least one tour to get promoted to certain ranks. You had to have done, especially to get to the senior ranks. So you certainly had people that were coming in and doing their one, and I'm not faulting them because they were going back to missions that were just as important, maybe just not the priority at the time. And then there was a group of people that were, kind of bouncing around in the war zone and kind of had this addiction a little bit to it, that I don't think is, anybody that worked in the, in the SF community, special operations community, kind of understands that, and yeah, it's a great mission, but it's not without sacrifice, right? And there's a cost that comes with that to your family, to your psyche in many ways.
Yeah.
You see a lot of bad things out there, as you guys know.
Yeah.
And coming back and trying to assimilate is not always the easiest thing. But that's where the mission was, and that's where the organization and the whole of government, frankly, was on a CT war footing.
Right.
Whether you were a DHS officer or a CIA officer or a DOD officer, as you guys recall, that we were trying to stop another attack on the homeland. And I was happy, and not just happy, but I felt privileged, and I use that term purposely, to be a part of it.
So on the flip side of that, with your experience, like looking in retrospect, hindsight, with this huge focus on the counterterrorist environment and OIF and OEF, and then with ICE, do you feel as though the FI side suffered from that at all?
I don't think it did in theater. I actually think that by being deployed in these locations, it forced us to create a methodology that could be used for this type of mission of putting people on the X, the find, fix, finish mission. There wasn't the pre 9/11, the targeting career track at the CIA was almost non-existent.
Right.
I think it grew massively, not only in numbers but in importance with the advent of this new CT mission of, hey, we have to put people on the X to get them and remove them from the battlefield. We have to layer intelligence in a way that we weren't doing before, where we were overlaying SIGINT, HUMINT, GEOINT, and building out what that picture looks like on the ground, these NAIs, if you will, and start understanding patterns, start understanding networks, and our tradecraft changed to accommodate and support the mission. And that ended up creating a methodology that I think was at the forefront, that was then JSOC started using, you know what I mean? And now it's normal. But that methodology wasn't there. So the question about you saying, hey, did FI fall off? And I said, well, no, actually, I believe it's the opposite. FI was a big part of kind of creating this targeting methodology that we used and we learned from, and sensitive site exploitation. When we hit a target, hey, we got pictures, we got phones, we got letters. How, we have somebody, a detainee. How do we,
Exploit it.
exploit all this
Yeah. Yeah.
information? Like that methodology had to be created, and it happened very quickly. And I think to the benefit of the mission, and as that methodology was advancing, so was our capability and our mission, enhancing our mission.
It's really fascinating to think that this area of CT, which is very target fixated, very like you said, find fix finish, that actually bled into the FI and as later in your
Yeah,
career, but it actually bled into FI
yeah,
and improved the capabilities of foreign intelligence.
it did. It did. But it took us a while to figure that out, though.
Yeah.
Uh, but it was a great proving ground to kind of test these new ways of doing business, and again, leveraging the exploitation of information and then processing that data in a meaningful way, in an efficient way that it can be operationalized and take things off the objective and say, okay, let's figure out a process to get through it and then use that information because we might have another attack coming at us. So this can't be on a thumb drive and sent back to headquarters and sit on the shelf for a couple of months before anybody gets to it,
Yeah.
right? Doesn't work. Those days were over.
And being early in on that, early in on the GWAT with that, how was your relationship with the paramilitary aspects? Because they were kind of new too. They had been like the redheaded stepchildren for a long
Yeah,
time.
yeah. Honestly, I was super impressed with that cadre of people, and they kind of took me under their wing and helped me understand. I was a young base chief. I was a GS-12 base chief. It's kind of equivalent to a captain, I guess. And you know, I was fortunate to have some really seasoned operators that were in those positions that kind of grabbed me by the nose and helped me be a leader, and be responsible and be smart. Because there was always this, again, there was a little bit of this friction where it's like, hey, we got to go out here to prosecute, to collect this FI or meet this agent, or do this some sort of operation. But we could go this way and it would be the safe way, or we could, maybe veer off a couple clicks this way because we know there's some bad guys there and we can do some movement to contact and then go meet the agent. So we can go get it on. And you do, and you realize like, that's not our core mission, right? Our core mission is to collect FI and collect on senior Al Qaeda leadership.
Right.
There's other people in country that are here to do that.
Right.
Let's help them. Let's enable them to do that.
Right.
Although we have that capability built in-house with our indigenous folks, but it was both and there's a role for them in that, but there is also a role to be defensive and to protect the collection mission.
Yeah.
But there was always this balance and a little bit of friction, and you had to be, and as a young officer being dropped into that, having some good, former tier one guys that are now, ground branch guys that now are reporting to you in this forward base, kind of whispering in your ear, saying, "Hey, you might want to think about this," was really helpful for me.
So did you have to like rein them back and say,
There's times, yeah, there's times, there was times.
Yeah.
We had hard conversations, but it was all good. Everybody got it.
Yeah.
When everybody, we got everybody home safe.
Yeah.
Right. And we got the mission done.
So on that note, this would be maybe a good time to roll into this story, where fast forwarding a few years later, you're in a region of the world that in antiquity would have been called Mesopotamia, perhaps, and you got involved in a very interesting operation targeting Al Qaeda. That you had mentioned to me, and that the CIA had actually cleared you to tell this story in a fair level of detail.
Yeah. Yeah. The reason the agency cleared it just because it highlights how far we go as an organization to protect our sources, what we call agents, our agents. And the moral responsibility we have and the operational responsibility we have to protect them, safeguard them. Because if you think about it, they are risking their lives, the lives of their family, their livelihood, their careers, if they have them, to support the national security of the United States. So we have an obligation to protect them and safeguard them. And I think, from the agency thought that this was a story that was beneficial to be told to highlight that narrative when I approached them on it. But yeah, happy to talk about it. It was, during that mid 2000 timeframe, it was, in a location in the Middle East where that was there was a lot of Sunni and Shia strife and civil war and militias, and it was a very complicated and difficult environment to operate. And it was also a location where there was U.S. troops deployed. So as a CIA officer, you have a responsibility. Yes, you're there to collect FI and all these things, but there is a force protection responsibility that is paramount in everything that we're doing, right? There's duty to warn's responsibility. But I was PCS to this location and kind of given this mandate, which again wasn't unique to me. Everybody there is like, how do we get more, CT sources, counterterrorist sources that have access to Al-Qaeda decision makers and leadership? And this role I was in was a really unique role in a sense that it gave me an opportunity to work with some of the special mission units. And, again, there's nobody better than U.S. Special Forces, right? They really are dedicated people that really know how to know their tactics and their TT like at another level. So it was a really cool opportunity to really work closely with them and take intelligence and action it and operationalize it, and to be part of that firsthand, and to see through this case where I was able to meet an Al-Qaeda guy that had unique access, and he was, he was easy to contact. He was unvetted. We had not vetted him. So there was a concern that, he was seeking contact with me, with my organization to potentially, for nefarious purposes, suicide bomb, thing like that. But, with some very careful planning, we were able to arrange a meeting with him, a high threat meeting with him, which I was able to do with the help of our security teams. And, he was as advertised. He was right out of, central casting of what you think a terrorist would look like, kind of this burly man with a beard and, short pants and long beard. But the interesting thing about him, and, these high threat meetings are very, they're very stressful, and you're wearing local garb and you're armed and all these different things. And there's a whole process and protocol to arrange that meeting. But he was like, the interesting thing for me was that after meeting him, and I had to use a terp of one of our vetted, trusted interpreters who was a really, really brave, good guy. Man, what a great hero he was. And he was very, the way this guy looked, he looked the part, but he didn't speak the part. Like he was actually, once you got to know him, he had some unique personality traits, but he became, for a terrorist, kind of a likable guy, just because understanding where he came from and his motivations. He was disenfranchised. He had come he wanted to be part of Al-Qaeda, to get the Crusaders out of his country, if you will. And, he really did, he was one of the brothers, as they call themselves, and was fully bought in and pledged bayat to Al-Qaeda and all those things. and allegiance. And over time, he realized he became disenfranchised because he kind of, the myth of Al Qaeda, he realized was a grand lie. The way they were treating other Muslims through some of their attacks, a lot of Muslims were getting killed. This idea of, when the fighters were getting killed, when the brothers were getting killed, hey, whether it be in their activities or suicide bombers, we'll take care of your family and your widow. None of that was happening. None of it. They were all drinking and, smoking and, the piety that he thought that the Al Qaeda brand stood on, it just wasn't there and it was a lie. And he realized that his time was going to be up. The more he was involved with this network, he just knew it was a matter of time until he got it. He was going to die. And he was concerned. He had a wife and young kids, and he was concerned about them. So as a father, you could kind of relate to it. That's where I'm saying there was a side of him that you could almost relate to on why he wanted to work with us and change his situation and his outcome. And he ended up being a really brave and courageous soul. And it also highlighted for me that, the power of one great source can really have a huge impact.
And it sounds like this guy really was a primo source, that he had all kinds of inside insight into the organization at a high level.
He did. He had unique access, and he had Al Qaeda credentials. He had there was blood on his hands. There was U.S. blood on his hands, but he also had religious credentials. So he was accepted at the highest levels within the organization, and we started running him. I started running him, and we had to vet him over time, but his information was really good, and the proof in the pudding was when I was passing it to the special operations team. The they are actioning it on a nightly basis, and they're like, hey, this level of detail, the bed down locations, the coordinates, it's not uncommon, but at the rate that he was doing it and the specificity that he had was unique at the time.
Pat, can you talk on a little bit on a personal level? Because the popular media image of a CIA case officer is obviously cold, heartless, willing to blackmail, willing to do whatever it takes. But here you are, you're dealing with a man who has American blood on his hands.
Yeah.
But also or believe that he is disillusioned with what's going on. From a human point of view, from a sense of empathy, from anything else, how do you deal with somebody like that when you're meeting them?
That's a great question. I think what you walk into and where you start is not where you end, depending on the level of vetting. And the business of a case officer, no matter whether it's in a CT framework or in a hard target framework, and you guys know this, it's about relationships, right? It's about building relationships, even if it's in a liaison capacity, it's about building relationships. And, through that relationship, you leverage that relationship to direct, the person you're working with, and you build trust and you get them to do the things you want them to do to benefit the United States. But they're humans, right? And every case that you recruit, I don't care if it's a CT case or what, it's an intimate relationship, not in a sexual way, but it's a very personal relationship that you have. Because me as a case officer, I realize I have a responsibility to protect this guy. If he is vetted and he's working hard and he's doing the things that we ask him to do, we have a responsibility, a moral obligation to protect him and his family. Now, they're not always good at following your orders and heeding your advice, but you have a moral obligation to do it because they are risking their lives. They're risking everything to protect, us, our kid, our families, and the homeland. You know what I mean? that's a long way of answering your question, but as you build the relationship and as you get through these vetting milestones with them, and agents prove themselves, you draw closer to them and you draw them in, but you can't be so close to them you lose your objectivity, right? There is a line, because at the end of the day, yes, we have to protect them and do all those things, but if I have to protect him or protect a kid from the 82nd Airborne, I'm going to go with protecting the kid from the 82nd Airborne.
Right.
And if I lose my source, I lose my source. So there's a balance, though. You know what I mean? Because you have to, and we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's what I think the interesting part about this case was that as the relationship grew and we were able to vet him more, we realized, wow, we were in a unique position with this guy, and we're going to be able to take down a tremendous part of this network, and we did. But while we were doing that, the network and the leadership were also starting to look around and say, who's the mole?
Right.
Right. So, we as case officers and, the agency, we have a responsibility to collect that information, and we can't sit on it. We've got to put it out.
Right.
Putting it out, and there's operational units that are going to action it. That's part of the business. And, as they action these targets, the noose is tightening around the source's neck.
Right.
If that makes sense.
Yes.
Yeah, because the special mission unit's taking all these people off the chessboard, so there's just naturally less and less players on the field, and they're all, I imagine, pointing fingers at one
Yeah. Who has access? Who is where? Yeah.
Yeah.
And it was, there was some good hunting going on.
Yeah.
Believe me, good hunting going on.
So,
And
so what happens with this is you talk about striking this balance between, force protection of the American soldiers out there with protecting your source. How did that start to play out?
so as the case matured, it became more difficult. And I started to have conversations with special forces to say, hey man, like we need to be a little more selective about how we're doing this. And the whack-a-mole strategy I know is great, but there is a little bit of conflict of mission where there was a whack-a-mole mentality from the special ops guys, but I'm not faulting that. And as an agency case officer, we're tasked with getting Al Qaeda leadership. So as they want to take out the bottom part of the pyramid, if you will, and here's the Al Qaeda leadership, and we want to get to the top.
Right.
Right. We want to cut off the head, and they want to whack everybody.
Yeah.
And that whack-a-mole strategy is good because there's a force protection play. As they're hitting these targets, they are protecting other U.S. forces on the ground. So this is where the confluence of, the differing missions start. You start seeing like, hey, how do we navigate this? Because I have this is not, I'm not going to say once in a generation source. I'm not going to go that far, but he was a really good source, believe me. And how do we extend the life cycle of this source so that we get to the top of the pyramid without getting him killed? But at the same time, how do we ensure that we're keeping in mind that force protection mission?
Right.
There were some hard conversations, believe me.
Because these low-level guys are the guys out there in placing the IEDs, doing stuff like that.
Right.
You're spot on, Dave. That's exactly right. So morally, I found myself in a tough place sometimes.
Yeah. It makes sense. Yeah.
Where I have this relationship and responsibility to protect this source, but I also have a responsibility to protect our troops on the ground.
And so what happened to this? What happened to this gentleman as the noose tightened around his neck?
Yeah, so we started getting a sense that the noose was tightening around, and he was talking to me about it. We were throwing the tradecraft kitchen sink at him, if you will, to this case we were pulling out all the stops to try to come up with creative ways to protect him, and we did some things to do that extended, and kind of put the trail pulled the trail off him, if you will. If there was a trail of Al Qaeda senior guys looking around, we were able to move that off of him, if you will, for a couple of months, and it worked. But as as my the special ops team I was embedded with, if you will, they kept being active, and I wanted them to be active. But although we were starting to put some controls in place because they saw the value of the source, they didn't know who he was, but they saw the value. So they also were trying to put some controls in place. But we got to a point where, it was clear that he was going to be under duress. And then it all kind of culminated one day where I was in contact with him, and the source was basically saying, "Hey, I've been asked to meet the senior guy, and I'm super excited about it, and this is great for us, and yada yada yada." And I was like, "This doesn't seem right." There was like something I was trying to talk to him about, like, how did this come to fruition? Why do they suddenly want you to meet? Like, this something doesn't seem right. And my instincts were like, "Hey man, this could be a setup." He was adamant that it was not. The source was adamant. So I was like, okay. And I just said, "Hey, look, man," I had told them this earlier in the relationship. I go, "I can't really go into how, but I'm just telling you, you are such an important part of what we do and I'm telling you that we have ways to protect you. And I just want you to know that, we have ways to monitor. I can't tell you how, but I will protect you. If something bad's going to happen to you, I'm going to do everything I can to protect you." And I had said that to him a couple months earlier, and he saw that I was doing some things to kind of throw the Al Qaeda leadership off his trail, and it worked. So he saw that, and that resonated with him. Like, okay, they are helping me out. These guys aren't bullshitting me. And he said the next day he was gonna make this meeting. So I told him, I was like, "Hey man, the next day, good luck." And he's like, "I'm not gonna be in contact or anything." I was like, "Don't worry. If there's an opportunity for me to monitor the situation, I will. But good luck." But I'm concerned. I was clear with him about my concerns. I told the special ops guys about what was happening, that this could happen the next day. So sure enough, the next day happens. He leaves in the morning. We are, without going, we're kind of monitoring the situation, and at some point, we're seeing some things that highlight, the kind of tradecraft that the bad guys, that Al Qaeda uses to facilitate senior meetings. We see it kind of happening. I'm like, "Oh, this is interesting." And then at some point during this process, he is taken out of a vehicle at gunpoint to his face and thrown in the trunk of a vehicle. And right away, I was like, they're going to kill him. And I jumped in my car with the Terp and went down to the special ops guys, and I was like, "Hey man, I think they're going to kill him." And there was a debate, and they were like, "Well, no, this is what it looks like for a meeting with a senior Al Qaeda guy. They don't want him to know where the meeting's going to occur." I was like, "But they don't put a gun to his face. He's a made guy, right?" So we had this debate with this commander I did about, is this high threat? No, is this a senior meeting protocol that we're seeing, or is this a form of Al Qaeda tradecraft for him to take the agent to a senior meeting, or is this they're going to kill him? And I was convinced they were going to kill him. And he was okay, well, the special ops commander was like, "Well, what do you want me to do?" I was like, "I want you to go get him." I go, "This guy's done a lot for us, and we owe it to him. At least try." Now, asking that question, I had a moral conflict with too, because I was asking them to go do a daytime raid in a not pleasant place, in a violent part of the city. So I had a moral conflict with that. Like, wow, I'm putting U.S. troops at harm to go get this guy. And I was concerned about that. And, the commander of this unit He's like, you know what? You're right. This guy did a lot for us. We're gonna go do it. So right there, in front of me, they pull out the map and they really put a mission together in like 5 minutes. And just that process, and it was very rudimentary. Like, we're gonna drive the armored vehicles, and he, by the way, he was at a house that we had never seen before, and they pulled him out of the vehicle at gunpoint, put him inside the house, and put out armed guards in front of the house, which was really strange. So we're like, what's going on? Maybe this is a scene. We kept questioning ourselves a little bit because of the protocols they were putting in place for this, but I still was convinced they were going to kill him. So the SF guys, the special ops guys, were like, okay, we'll go get him. And this plan in 5 minutes, like, we're gonna take the armored vehicles, we're gonna drive to the end of this end of the street, the block, and the house was at the opposite end of the street. And 4 guys are gonna get on the skids of a little bird that were parked right out back, and they're gonna fly. And when they come over, where the drop-off point was, where the guys on the ground were, as soon as the little bird gets over them, they're gonna start running to the house, and the little bird will land on the roof, and the guys will hit the house at the same time. And they start kidding up and turn up the music, and freaking dogs are getting ramped up. You know what I mean? It's actually, these guys are one of a kind, man. They're the best. You know that. And they launch, and I'm sitting there in the jock and listening and watching and monitoring. And sure enough, the mission goes. As soon as the little bird comes over, they start running. Little bird, is landing on the roof, and take out the armed guys out front very quickly. The guys on the ground that ran up to the house breach, get in. There's a big firefight. I'd showed him pictures of my guy, and they called jackpot, and they were like, "Hey, we got this guy. What do you want us to do?" I was like, "Treat him like everybody else that we're taking off the objective. Same protocols, flex cuff them, blindfold them." So, there was like 3 or 4 guys, taken off the objective, brought back to the facility. I'm waiting downstairs with my Terp and the SF commander, and they're lined up. The guys that survived, that weren't killed, were all bloodied and blindfolded and flex cuffed. And we go grab one and kind of Terp, let him know, didn't want him to know that the counterparts that survived, that there was anything
Right, you don't
different.
want them to know.
It's like everybody else, right? Brought him into the room, closed the door. It's me, the Terp, the JSOC guy. He's sitting in front of me. Pull the blindfold off. The agent just starts bawling, starts crying. And I was like, "Hey, man, I got to know." Were you going to meet a senior guy, or were they going to kill you? And he said, they were going to kill me. And they were about to kill me. And I was arguing with them that the leadership had sent 2 people to kill me. I was like, "Well, why?" And he's like, "They didn't know it was me. They just suspected." They were looking around at everybody, and some of the meetings I had been, there was only a few people in this one and that one. They started to suspect me, and 2 guys were going to shoot me, and I begged them to let me pray, and they agreed after, going back and forth with them, and pulled out the prayer rug, started prayed for my family. And he said, I prayed about what you told me, that you would protect me. And as I was praying, the helicopter landed on the roof.
If he wasn't a devout Muslim before that, he certainly was after, right?
Yeah, it's quite an amazing story, and it's like you can't make it up.
Yeah.
It was quite an emotional meeting, as you can imagine. But it highlights that ethos that we have in the agency, that, one of my mentors, a senior officer by the name of Mark Kelton, used to say, "We don't leave agents on the street."
Mm-hmm.
Like, we go and get them, whether, it's a planned meeting, unscheduled meeting. We don't leave them behind. That ethos, we protect them at all costs. We go and get them. And we did. And it's a good story in a sense that nobody on the U.S. side was injured, thank God. And we saved his life. And it was sadly the case came to an end, but it it also reinforced why we do this business. It's about relationships. There's people at the other side on the other side that we're working with too.
So does your agent that you rescued? I mean, is he owning a gas station in New Jersey now?
I don't know what he's doing. I hope he's still alive. But yeah, we definitely took care of him. I have no idea what he's doing now, but he's not working with us anymore.
Pat, do you feel that the way modern media, movies, film, TV, stuff like that portrays CIA? Do you think that helps you guys in the recruiting or hurts you guys in recruiting?
So I think there's a narrative out there that we're a rogue organization or we're a risk averse organization, right? And we're not both. We're not either. Um, there is, as you guys know, in this community, there's good people, we're good Americans, follow the law. Yeah, we break the law overseas, but we follow the law in the US. We're not the baby killers, we're not the coup, we're not doing the coups, we're not all those negative things that you hear about that we're kind of this ghost and easy to point to. And you hear about our mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
But the thing that I think hurts us most are the leaks.
Mm-hmm.
There's something to be said about keeping our secrets secret. And there's a mystique that comes with that. There's a mystique that comes with the organization that attracts, that helps us in those moments when we're trying to recruit agents.
Mm-hmm.
And leaks and people talking about what we do, it undermines this this narrative that we are, when we're working with agents or trying to recruit an agent, that we're going to protect you at all cost. And when they hear about the leaks and this and that and this negative narrative about the organization, they're like, they come in with predisposed judgment. Like, why would I work for you guys?
Mm-hmm.
So it does hurt it
Mm-hmm.
always. But I've been in meetings where you have to address that.
Yeah.
Believe
The thing that really comes to mind isn't a media fabrication, but the loss of a lot of Chinese agents. Like, how does that hamper U.S. intelligence efforts across the board when something like that major happens?
Yeah, the what you're referring to has kind of been reported in the media, and I can just say that it undermines our ability to do it. I'm not saying we can't do the job. It just makes
Right.
it harder. It puts one arm behind your back,
Right.
if you will. And these quote unquote anonymous leaks, whether they're coming from the Hill or the whatever, one of the three branches of government, and people get to feel empowered, like, oh, I get to see my, a senior official, I get to see my quote in the paper. I mean, it undermines what we're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a cost.
Mm-hmm.
Um, there's an we take OPSEC very seriously, and when there's entities outside of the organization that are leaking, and it just undermines our ability to do it, and it impacts everything, like even your foreign partners. Like, you're in a liaison meeting and they're like, what the hell's this?
Right.
And when liaison work is hard, and you have to invest in those relationships, and it undermines that too. So it's I don't know a better way to say it other than there is definitely an impact, but it doesn't stop what we do. It
Right.
just makes it, and you have to kind of adapt and work around it.
Well, that's interesting because we think about leaks in terms of leaks from inside the agency or whatever, but really we all know why the agency has so much oversight, and there are reasons for it and whatnot. But Are there factors to mitigate, like a staffer who thinks they're doing the right thing or whatever, but is privy to this knowledge, or maybe not even doing the right thing? They, like you say, they just want to see their quote in the headlines. Like, are there steps to mitigate that? Are there severe punishments?
Well, so there's not steps that we can do. I mean, we have operational steps that we do for OPSEC internally, right?
Right.
But when it comes to oversight committees, we have a responsibility to be transparent about what we do with those, like whether it's covert action or any, there's very candid discussions with the oversight committees and the staffers about what we do. And look, they are, they are vetted and read in and all the background checks on them and everything. So they are cleared people to do it. And frankly, I don't know. I don't think they're necessarily the ones from the oversight committees that are the most responsible. In my experiences, those are the people that we were most trusted with, that I felt most comfortable talking to, frankly, because they were welcomed into our world and they understood the consequences more so than the member that wasn't on the oversight committee, that's on the on the armed service committee or some other
Right.
committee. So they were brought in and part of, under the tent. And so I was actually felt very comfortable talking to them. And we have a a legal responsibility to keep them informed on what we're
Right.
doing. And we do it. We don't hide anything from them.
Yeah. Yeah. It's interesting. It's a tough. I mean, we need transparency. We need freedom in this country, and there are obviously drawbacks at times to that.
Yeah, I think, that it's a great point because, there's, there post 9/11, right? There's this one side's security, one side's privacy, right?
Right.
And pre 9/11, you could say privacy was factored more than security. Post 9/11, it tipped the balance the other way, right? The Patriot Act, all these different things. And it gave the enterprise of the intelligence community and the Department of Defense and the Department of Homeland Security a lot of additional authorities and space to operate to ensure there wasn't another attack on the homeland. Then you start having, the Snowdens of the world and the leaks of the world, and suddenly there's this perception that, oh no, the government is now Big Brother. The government has gone way too far. Let's bring back privacy over security. And, that's a very complicated question. And as someone as an intelligence professional, I looked at that and I said I was very concerned with some of those changes that came because some of the leaks brought certain things to light. And from my perspective, I was like, well, when there's another attack on the homeland, don't say it was an intelligence failure, policy failure for changing the policy. So, you're taking some of the teeth and the power out of our ability to, be out in front and forecast and predict and prevent attacks. Just understand that if you want your privacy over security, just understand that there's a
I mean, we also have to point out here that, if you look at like the hacking of what it was at the Office of Personnel Management and all of your guys's clearance information getting leaked out there, or just this last week finding out that the back doors at AT&T and Verizon and these big media companies, telecom companies, was hacked by a third-party intelligence service. I mean, our government itself cannot be trusted with our sensitive information. So I feel like I would be remiss to not point out that it's not that I don't trust you, the CIA guy, but our government itself is, yeah.
Yeah, you're spot on. And I couldn't agree. I'm in violent agreement with you. And we as a society probably give more access of our personal data to social media companies
Then we should.
Yeah.
would ever be interested in or had access to, yet that's okay,
Right.
but the government having that access, that type of information to protect us from a potential threat from a state actor or non-state actor, there's concerns about that. And so, to your point, yeah,
Yeah.
it's
So after your Mesopotamia tour, you end up in some other parts of the world, some base chief positions elsewhere in the Middle East, and then going into national resources. You want to kind of like walk us through what you're able to tell us about that those years of your career?
yeah. Sorry. Yeah. So I stayed in South. I went to South Asia again for another opportunity as a base chief, and it was during a really interesting time from 2010 to 2011, where there was a there was it was the Obama administration, and there was a the threat was Al Qaeda was still very active in South Asia, and there were still massive concerns about potential threats to the homeland or in Europe. And it was a really interesting time to be there, as these long wars had just kind of continued and drifted along. But it was also a time where we were at the peak of that methodology that I talked about early on. My first time being in South Asia. Now, several years later, we had really that line and block chart of Al Qaeda had went from very small to now we had expanded that and had great insight into that network, who the players were, their tradecraft, um, and we were able to start developing strategic cases that gave us unique insight. We developed our partnerships in the region with Liaison to help us navigate and also understand that target and gain more insight and build capacity and capability in our liaison partners that we were able to leverage to support our ongoing CT efforts. So, very different time from my first time in South Asia to now this experience, several years later. And it was a very interesting time. Obviously, that was the period of when the Bin Laden raid was executed. And just a really, really interesting time to be a part of kind of that mission set during that period and leverage all that. Again, the technology and the methodology had really developed and put us in a different position to prosecute those targets.
Do you want to talk a little bit about NR? Because I think when we talk about misconceptions about the CIA, another one is that you guys operate domestically, which is really not the case. But there is an exception that working hand in glove with the FBI, you are able to do some things in the
Yeah,
United States.
and there's been a tremendous amount of reporting on this. And after coming out of there, I did have the opportunity to come back and work in the domestic space. And where under this DNI construct, where the CIA station chief is the DNI chief overseas, right? Domestically, it's really the FBI that serves that DNI role. And we are, the level of coordination about what we're doing is very close, not without conflict and disagreement, but really good people there. You can imagine working in the NR field. I say that domestic field, the tremendous home advantage that you have. Think of it through this lens, where you have foreigners living abroad, whether they're third world countries, I don't care where they're at. And typically, the best of their diplomats, of their intelligence officers, are the ones that are awarded, right, with that cherry on top of their career to come back and work in the United States.
Right.
And so those people are usually connected people that have access, people that may or may not have previously been exposed to a Western lifestyle, haven't been exposed to democracy and the freedoms that we have, to a capitalist society, and they come here and they're like, wow, I get to live in, Washington or New York or, where consulates are all over the United States. This is very different. I see why people talk about the American dream.
Right.
This is great. This is great. I make more money here. Typically their host nation governments, their salary goes up. They have a better house. They have a better lifestyle. What a great home court advantage to approach someone and ask them and work with them, potentially target them for recruitment.
Right.
It's a really, the domestic space gets a bad rap is like, that's not where the field work is, but I would argue some of our greatest successes come from here because of this tremendous home court advantage we have.
Pat, can we rewind real quick? So when we talk about we're talking about national resources. We're talking about the CIA, right? We're talking about the CIA in the United States. Can we talk about some of the misconceptions and the realities of the CIA? Like the hit teams that went after Bruce Willis and Red. The assassins you guys have living all over the United States. Can we talk about some of the realities and misconceptions about the CIA in the U.S.?
Yeah, I mean, and a lot of this has been reported in the open press, but there are different mandates that we have domestically than we have abroad. We can't break U.S. law here in the U.S. in the government at all. We don't break U.S. law abroad. We break the laws of foreign countries abroad, right, by what we're doing. But we're not breaking U.S. law, and we're certainly not doing it in here. And we're doing it in a much more coordinated fashion with our CIA, our FBI brothers and sisters. And it's very controlled, and there are mandates, legal mandates in place that what we do is very narrowly focused on, foreign targets operating in the United States. So we don't have the same mandate that we have abroad that we have here because of U.S. law, and it works. And it works. And there's challenges, yeah, absolutely, with different mission sets between the FBI and us, but we've found a way to make it work. And I think the 9/11 highlighted how it didn't work, what our risks were. And I think that was a game changer for us, and the relationships and how we operate and coordinate and share information changed because of 9/11. It's not perfect, but it's changed and it's gotten a lot better.
So, just for clarity, you are saying that you don't have hit teams.
No, I heard he's
Stationed.
confirming. He's confirming the assassination teams.
So, for a lot of people who don't know, like the CIA doesn't have arrest authority. So, so how does that work in partnership with the FBI in the United States?
So the FBI has a counterintelligence mission, right? And that mission is to identify foreign agents that are operating in the United States to collect intelligence and any of the American cases that they are handling, right? So think of a Russian or a Chinese or a foreign intelligence officer operating in the United States, basically doing the CIA mission that we do abroad, doing
Right.
it here, recruiting Americans, trying to gain access to steal our secrets. And so the FBI has a counterintelligence mission. The CIA has a counterintelligence mission as well as a foreign intelligence mission. So that counterintelligence mission merges, if you will, with the FBI. It's domestically we work in parallel and in deep coordination with them to support that mission. So how do we identify foreign intelligence officers that are operating here? How do we create opportunities to potentially approach and recruit them? And when they go back to their foreign country, we are running them as an agent. That's kind of the game plan of the mission set that the domestic team has here.
Pat, I'm trying to land the airplane, but we still have a few things here to talk about. Could you tell us about? I know you can't say where you were, but when the Bin Laden raid happened, what your, if you have any insights, what your visibility was at that time?
Um, yeah, there's been a lot of this in the press and the reporting. I think a couple things. One, it was really interesting to see like the most compartmented secret mission probably in the history of the agency leading up, you know, to that night, May 1st, United States, May 2nd, if in Pakistan, the time frame, the most secretive, very tightly compartmented um, planning because, and people took it extremely serious because everyone who was involved recognized that this was the best chance that we have had. Like the intelligence, in my view, was that good. So to me, you know, the, and how the next day everything just went public after the raid. That for me was quite shocking. I mean, it was like everything just came out the
Yep.
next day.
Yeah.
So, that looking back was a really interesting um, contrast to the whole thing. The other thing that struck me was, um, you know, as I mentioned, in my view, I thought there was a pretty good, a lot of this has been public reported, and you've seen this where you've seen the president say it was a 50-50 call.
Yeah.
And I think I thought in my view that, based on everything I've read and what's been in open source, you could make a fair assessment that um, the intelligence was so good that there was a consequence for not doing it. Right. So that's a little bit, that's kind of how I view it. And, it was a very proud moment. It was a lot of hard work from a lot of people, not just in South Asia, but, over, I would say not just that year in South Asia, but over a period of time, developing that network and fleshing it out and building it out. Um, there was liaison partners that were contributing and they may not even known it, how putting this jigsaw puzzle together. And, the way that this thing came together with the different parts of one, the enterprise, kind of the technical side and the DO side, combining that with, the special mission unit side, the way all that came together while maintaining the integrity of the operation and the OPSEC of the operation is really interesting and a massive success. That we were able to pull it off just because, there was a history working in that part of the world where, we would lose custody of things because of the requirement to, share the information with our liaison counterparts or develop it more before it reached a threshold to take action. And, along the way, we would lose custody or something would happen. So the fact that we were able to build this intelligence picture in the manner in which we did it with outstanding operational security is really a testament to the professionals that were involved with it. It was, it was really, it's once in a lifetime like operation,
And I also want to ask you about, one of the next positions you had was being an assistant to the deputy director and getting to see, at a very high level in the CIA and the interagency process, how things come together and, what you gleaned from that experience.
Yeah, it was a great experience. I had a chance to be a unique opportunity to be an assistant to the deputy director at the time was Avril Haines, who's now the DNI. And it allowed me to kind of see how the sausage was made. Not just, I had been limited to the DO really up until this point in my career. and I was a young, GS 15, I think, at this point, and you suddenly get exposed. Okay, this is how the enterprise works. This is how the different directorates within the organization come together to, the support, the technical side, the operational side, the analytical side. This is how this sausage is made to create this piece of paper of finished analysis that goes to the policymaker so that they can make their decision. So you get to see that process happen, and then you get internally, the enterprise-wise, and then you get to see the interagency and working with the executive branch, working with the legislative branch, and how the seventh floor, the director and the deputy director, what their roles are, how they engage, with the White House. It was fascinating, and for me, as an officer that was just coming into my own, I learned a lot about the business of intelligence and how we support the policymakers. But more importantly, it exposed me to this whole network of people, both domestically and traveling abroad with the deputy director, and being in these meetings with very senior leaders of countries and intelligence services, and just being in that world. And I was able to build this network of people that helped me as my career progressed down the road. But very fortunate, learned a lot. But they wanted me to come in, and as a deputy director, came in brand new to the organization from outside. She was first time working at CIA. At the time, she was the most senior woman in the history of the CIA, and help her understand the Directorate of Operations. But I think she helped me a lot more than I helped her, and I learned a tremendous amount from her.
And then I got to ask you, like, maybe, I don't know if you consider this the kind of capstone of your career, but I mean, there was a point in time afterwards where you were put in charge of all Russia operations at CIA.
Yeah, I mean, that was a couple years later after I worked for the deputy director. I was fortunate enough to be a COS in Europe during a very volatile time from 2014 to 2017, where, the massive, I thought it was going to be a chance to take my foot off the pedal and relax a little bit. But, that was a time where the threat from Syria and Northern Africa had really, and immigration has really changed the landscape of Europe, and the attacks in Paris and Belgium, and the Christmas markets in Germany. The lights were flashing red, and coming out of that, I was trying to find what my next assignment would be. I knew I had to come back to headquarters, and when I was a CT guy, and there was several jobs that I was looking at, and I saw that the running the Russian operations position, which in our organization is a very unique and wanted position, but traditionally it goes to somebody who would come up through the ranks in Central Eurasia Division and served in Moscow and spoke the language. And I had reached out to a mentor of mine on the seventh floor and said, "Hey, here's the 5 jobs I'm looking at." And they noticed being in charge of all Russian operations around the world, and they're like, "Yeah, you don't want to." And this was 2017, and they're like, "Yeah, you don't want that job. We have to make a lot of changes there. It's not going to be pretty. After what the Russians did to undermine our elections in 2016, we got to think about changing how we do business there." And this person on the seventh floor is basically saying, we're gonna make massive changes there, and it's gonna be hard. People aren't gonna want to change, so don't apply for that job. Look at these other ones. I was a little bit disappointed, and we got off the phone, and then but I was kind of actually super interested in it. I'm not why, because I didn't have that background. I didn't have the
Right.
Russian background, and I was like, no, that would have been a cool challenge. Anyway, so I was a little disappointed. Got off the phone. Next day, this guy from the seventh floor pinged me. I was like, "Hey, call me." I'm like, "Hey, what's up?" And he's like, "Hey, I thought about it overnight. I want you to take that job. Change it, and you're going to help me change it." And he's like, I was like, yeah, but I got interviews for these other 4 jobs. He's like, I'm assigning you to this position. It's done. Don't need to do interviews. And that was that. That's how it happened. And it was a unique and great opportunity, and loved it. And I learned a lot about that target set. But I also was, that was 2017 when I assumed that position. And again, coming on the heels of 2016, where, as we talked about, the Russians really had learned this new kind of TTP of leveraging social media, this active measures using social media, propaganda, misinformation, disinformation. And they kind of honed that skills in 2014 in Ukraine during the Maidan, and then realized how effective it could be, and not very costly, leveraging the internet, leveraging social media. And they took that, kind of the TTPs that they figured out and applied it uh, to our election process from 2015 and through up to the election in 2016, if you guys recall. And all this came out in the Mueller report, and talking about how they were sowing discord and undermining our democracy through identifying these issues that are of really sensitive issues that are charged, whether it be race, whether it be gun rights, whether it be LGBTQ, and pouring gasoline on these issues with social media, leveraging social media and misinformation. The Internet Research Agency, led by Prigozhin, based out of St. Petersburg. Again, all this came out in publicly in the Mueller report, and how they used this tool, this instrument, to, even though the Mueller report said they didn't change the outcome of the election, but they undermined our election
Sure.
and so forward, and really eroded the trust that we have in our democratic institutions. So, assuming that job in 2017, it was a really fascinating time, where people were pissed off.
They wanted you to take the gloves off.
That's Let me frame it this way. And I don't, we viewed 2016 as and I want to show respect to 9/11 because of the lost souls, and I do, but not to the level of 9/11, but a version of 9/11, where that's how deep it struck a chord, what the Russians did, this covert action program that they did, which you could make the argument is still continuing to this day. I mean, if you look about the Russia collusion investigation that came out of that, and how that polarized our politics, and how that continues today, the Russians are just laughing about this, and they are happiest, and they're amplifying these divisions,
Yeah.
and continue to sow discord. So yes, there was a sense of, and in that position, and leading and overseeing the Russian operations globally, the program globally. I one of my responsibilities was to go to the oversight committees and work with all 3 branches of government. Because of that position, you have a lot of interaction as far as driving the mission across not only the agency but the IC. And it was interesting because there was uniformity on both sides of the aisle about getting off our back foot and getting on the front foot to ensure what happened in 2016 doesn't happen in our midterm elections in 2018. And more importantly, what do we do to make sure it doesn't happen again in 2020?
Right. So I'm curious because from what you said that your mentor on the 7th floor said, to me it sounded like, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but to me it sounded like there was going to be some sort of house cleaning, because not necessarily because we didn't keep up with the Russian TTPs, but there were other issues involved. So how was it seen, and how was it? How did it change? Were there, I don't want to say were there failures, but
I would say, look, the the magnitude of 2016 that we did not see that coming, everybody felt across the government.
Okay.
Right. So it wasn't necessarily a house cleaning. It was more
Right.
about how do we change how we do business to now keep up with the way the Russians are doing business.
Yeah, the rules are changing.
Yeah, the rules are changing. So let's bring in somebody that doesn't know the old way.
Right.
And the old way was bad because
Right.
the tradecraft standard of the folks that were doing it, I mean, it's just at a higher standard.
Right.
They're fantastic. And their knowledge, the expertise they have is unique. But let's bring in a new face that has a different type of experience using different methodology, like that we've learned in other parts of the world about putting people on the X, but let's put them on the X for FI purposes to recruit people.
Right.
Let's, you know what I mean? So it wasn't cleaning a house. It was just,
Okay.
let's think about, let's bring in a fresh idea person to think about how we could do this different. And that's, so again, it's not a negative thing about the past. It's just like, hey, can we prosecute this in a different way? And let's think about this, you know, how this mission set differently. That was the impetus behind it.
Are you able to talk at all about any of the changes that you implemented or that were brought to you?
Look, I think, you know, it's been widely reported that there was a call to arms in different media outlets, and there was, and it was, you know, and that to me instituted a change. It was a change of mindset, if you will, and it was kind of harking back to what we had learned over the last, you know, 17 years in the long wars, and applying that, and really similar to what we did post 9/11, where we did a call to arms to get people to deploy out to South Asia and the Middle East. That was the kind of thing like, hey, here's a call to arms. Look what happened in 2016. We, you know, the IC has a bloody nose over this and a black eye, and we have to make sure that we get on our front foot and don't let that happen again. And basically putting out a call to arms to say, come join up, come in. We're looking for different types of experiences and career tracks to change how we do business, leveraging, you know, technology, leveraging targeting, leveraging different things like that. That was really changing the mindset of how we prosecute the mission.
That's an interesting point too, because you know, I obviously everybody, you know, has their hands in a few things, but I think typically or traditionally you think of the CIA as a human-based organization, and when it comes to the SIGINT and cyber aspect, you know, you think of the NSA and more recently maybe CISA or whatever. But how does that all come together for like the CIA's mission, for collaboration, for things like that?
So I mean, great question. I think, you know, depending on what the operational opportunity is, it comes together in a different way. You know, one of the things that has been reported, and I think the New York Times had some recent reporting on this, was that, you know, there was a sense of bringing, you know, where in the past, you know, there was kind of this, we didn't want to, you know, due to the sensitivity of this mission set, we didn't always work with liaison. Now, how do we approach our foreign partners that view the Russians as a compatible target?
Mm-hmm.
In other words, hey, we have a Russia program. You guys have a Russia program. What if we brought those Russia programs together to have a greater effect against this target? Was kind of the mentality that we had to start prosecuting, you know, how we did operations differently, and it worked. And we started to see differences. Yes, we learned some things along the way, but we also kind of started building this coalition. Again, this was reported in some New York Times stuff, and just in the last year, on kind of building this coalition of liaison Russia programs that proved to be very helpful, leading into, you know, obviously in the last few years with the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
Mm-hmm.
We kind of plumbing in place and put
Right.
that infrastructure in place so that the sharing of intelligence was already happening. This target.
So, talk to us a little bit about retirement and where you're at today.
Yeah, great question. I think, I retired in November of 2020 and, could have stayed longer. Um, but we all have to kind of look ourselves in the mirror and say, what's more important for me? And it got to a point where, I had some young kids, and three daughters, three beautiful daughters, and, I needed to spend more time with them. And, this organization, it's a fantastic place to work, but it can be all consuming and it's very hard on families. So I wanted to, I came to the realization it was time for me to maybe, you know, I achieved more than I ever thought I would achieve. I'll tell you that. And I feel very fortunate and love loved every moment of it. And it would have been really easy to stay. And but at the same time, I think the harder decision and the right decision was to get out and spend more time with the family and work on that. Um, so so I got out 3 years ago. Got into the startup world for a few years, which was fascinating for me. Had the opportunity to learn about, and something I had no appreciation for, where, out of college into the military, into the organization, you know, almost 29 years of national security time. I never, you know, I was a civil servant. I didn't understand business. So I didn't have an MBA. So it was almost a time to get, a poor man's MBA, if you will, and kind of understand the business of a business, how to run a business, how to, all those things about investment, everything, all those different things, had a greater appreciation for that. And now, um, transitioned out of that. And now I work for a strategic consulting firm that is really heavy in the OSINT space, doing all kinds of great things as far as training and have a great global presence, an international presence. The company's called Orbis International and kind of helping them run their international section. So that's much more in my wheelhouse. I get the opportunity to support business opportunities and business development overseas, something I enjoy doing from my time at the agency. So it's been really good. It's been
How?
really good.
Do we have questions for
Yeah.
Pat?
I just out of curiosity, you left in 2020. What was your impression of the invasion? Like being kind of, you know, away from it, or
Um, you know, it was it wasn't surprising. I think that there was in my view, so the things that I've read, I think there was in one sense, we had really good intelligence where we were able to warn our partners of when the invasion was going to occur. That's been widely reported. But I think we also overestimated the Russian capability and we underestimated the Ukrainian willingness to fight. And so I think so that that miscalculation, if you will, I think also made the policy decisions coming soon after the invasion more difficult. I think there were some tough policy decisions because they didn't fully understand, um, you know, um, again, the Russian capability. We overestimated that, in my view. And the thing about the Russian target, I'll say this, and this isn't unique to this administration. Every administration has had this challenge: is how do you change Russian behavior, Putin's behavior, without escalation? Right? And no one's really figured that out yet. So it's a challenge.
yeah,
Because, nobody wants to end up in a nuclear war, but at the same time, the Russians are bad actors and they do things very differently. And they go to dark places very quickly,
yeah,
and they don't have a policy process to manage it like we do here.
yeah. And last question before we get to their questions, I'd love your insight in this because we have North Korea. that we don't hear about a ton. We have China, Russia, and Iran. I want you to necessarily rank them as threats, but in terms of like threat pictures, what are we most concerned about with each of those players?
Great question. I think one thing that we're concerned about that I think gets lost, I mean, they're all adversaries, right? Is their cooperation. They share intelligence, they share information. So, so if you're an intelligence or a Western intelligence service and you're trying to do some sort of operation, the Russians, the Chinese, they're going to share information with each other about what you're doing if they are able to uncover it, and then they're going to expose it. Where in the past there was more stovepipes between them, there's much more cooperation when it comes, they view us as a common enemy. So they share information, they share intelligence. So that's one aspect of it. And that, again, I'm not avoiding your question, but I think that's just something I wanted to frame for you guys that is not always talked about. I think, if you look at each one of those, I'm not a China hand, but I view them now that I'm out and, what I read and what I see, I view them as the biggest threat right now to our strategic national security. From an economic standpoint, from a military standpoint, they are extremely aggressive, when they're trying to steal our IP, hack into our networks, identify and uncover vulnerabilities. They're in the misinformation, disinformation game. They are putting out propaganda to maximize their influence and undermine ours. We have this current policy with them where, we have close, they're our biggest trade partner, and we can't decouple our relationship with them. So how do we de-risk it? And that's a challenge with someone who doesn't play by kind of the world rules, if you will. And so I view them right now as kind of the biggest threat, and they are actively pushing their sphere of influence throughout the Pacific. Obviously, we see it in Taiwan and throughout the region. We see it in Africa. We see it in Latin America. They are coming in heavy with money, purchasing influence, buying infrastructure, bringing in their technology. It is a full court press. And if you talk to our FBI colleagues, they view them as the biggest counterintelligence threat, and I tend to agree with that. So I would put them at the top. I would put Russia second, just because of who they are, what they stand for, their history. We see that, the leadership under Putin. We see them being active in Ukraine. They're a nuclear threat. Economically, I don't think they're a threat to us, but they've learned, since the war started, the invasion stated, they're really good from an intelligence standpoint and from their industrial base, where they've learned that from their shortcomings, and they now have spun up that engine. And if you look at this problem set, attrition's a real thing. They just have more people that they can throw at the problem set than the Ukrainians do. And that's why I think the Ukrainians, I mean, in my view, in my opinion, from what, I would just say that based on everything that I've read and my understanding of the problem, in my view, the future of the Ukraine is directly tied to U.S. assistance. Not European assistance, but U.S. assistance, and our ability to support and provide them weaponry that they need to counter the Russians.
It's like in 1936, I mean, the Russians got their teeth kicked in initially, but they have a very deep magazine. And once they got spun up, it became a hell of a fight.
Yeah. And just the attrition rates. I mean, the longer this drags on, the more advantage it has to Russia, in my view. But the only thing and if we don't provide that supplemental support, Ukraine's we're gonna lose the war, or capitulate and lose territory.
Yeah.
So, I kind of view them as 1 and 2 in the world order. as far as the biggest threats, that the adversaries that are out there. The CT threat is always going to be there, but frankly, it's been diminished greatly over the last 5 or 6 years. Great success in Syria and Iraq and other places. But it's still out there. Don't get me wrong, but it's not where it was in the mid 2000s, early 2000s. It's been significantly diminished. That said, we have to take the lesson, and this is the last thing I'll say on this, is that, when we were so focused on the CT war, for the first 15 years of it, leading up into the 2016 elections, we were so focused as a country and as a nation on counterterrorism. The Russians and the Chinese were building capacity and capability, and we were downsizing our budgets against them, where they were increasing. So now it's flipped, where we increased our budgets on China, increased our budgets to counter Russia, and we can't take our eyes off the CT, threat, because if we're not looking, that's going to grow. And obviously, with what happened in Afghanistan, that's the safe haven that is available, where, depending on what happens, that could be another opportunity for them to grow.
Is the CIA big enough?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I think it's not if it's big enough, is it funded appropriately? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And administrations come in with different priorities. What's more important right now? I'll just throw this out there. The CT, putting, billions of dollars towards CT, or should we put more money into stopping fentanyl coming in? I don't know.
Yeah.
But, in 2005, it was clear. The question was, CT's the priority, not Russia, not China, not fentanyl. It was CT, and then maybe CP, counterproliferation. That's what I'm saying.
Right.
So administrations are going to change based on, their agenda and what's happening in the world. So I just think it comes down to funding and resources, really,
Yeah.
to your point.
Thank you very much. And let's get to some of the viewer questions. Bjorn, thank you very much. How hard is it for case officers to become PMOOs, especially if they don't have mil background? Would they need a high-end federal LE experience or time in National Guard SF to pull off the move?
Great question. Thanks, Bjorn. It's not common for someone to get into the paramilitary cadre without at least 8 to 10 years of special operations experience. I didn't work there. I worked with them, and I don't want to speak for them, but at least my experiences, like I was an intel officer that worked at JSOC. If I would have said I want to be a paramilitary officer, they would have said, hell no.
Right.
Plus I was Air Force, right? They would have laughed me out of the building. So they would have said my golf game was too good or something like that. But yeah, it's one of those things where you have to have serious special ops chops, and not just have that, but be the best of that, of your cadre to be considered.
And times changed, right? So what they were looking for in 2001 very different from what they were looking for in 2010, because you had a whole new pool of people with combat experience and time in to choose from.
Yeah. And I think, to your point, like, the pre 9/11 paramilitary guy was not a case officer. The post 9/11 paramilitary person coming in is a paramilitary who is also a case officer.
Yeah.
And that was good for business. And somebody had made a strategic decision to get the paramilitary officers, case officer trained, and that was smart. And a great strategic move that continues to pay benefit today. But they are an elite bunch, and I tell you what, I'm a big fan of our paramilitary cadre. You could drop them into any place in the world, and they will figure it out and succeed.
M. Corbin, thank you very much. Do you find any of the changes the GRU has been implementing Operation in Europe concerning?
they, if you're referring to kind of their TTPs of how they do business, whether you're talking about the Skripal incident, or the little green men across the border, the eastern border of Ukraine.
He might be referencing some of the like sabotage events that have happened over the last 6 to 8 months.
Yeah, I it's always concerning. It's a great question. It's always concerning, but it's not surprising. As I commented just a few minutes ago, like they go to a very dark place because they don't have those legal constraints and policy, or that oversight that we have, right? And there's a cost for that. Undisciplined, kind of covert operations that are happening that are not, just necessarily coordinated and approved, by, in conjunction and done in coordination with the government, with the whole of government, like we do here, poses a lot of risks to strategic relationships that they may want or have. And, there's high consequence for that. So, yes, it's concerning, but it's not surprising because this is the way they operate. Um, a- and, I can't really go into more detail than that,
Sure.
but um, yeah, it's a great question. I wish I had a better answer that I could articulate, but I have guilty knowledge on things, and I can't go beyond that.
Pat, if you were king of the United States, how would you? What do you think the appropriate response is? Because you mentioned how Russia will go dark, and they will do things that Western countries generally won't do. But if you were king of the United States, what do you feel is an appropriate response to strategies or tactics like the Havana syndrome and things like that? Do Yeah, I mean that's my question.
Yeah, so on a macro level, I'll say like they are very much, you always hear of the zero sum game with them, and it's true. Like they will take pain. They are willing to consume pain if it hurts us, right? And we don't approach the world that way, and how we do business. But I will say that they do respect power. So negotiating from a position of power is always going to benefit you, um, with the Russians. Now, break, go back to what I said earlier. Every administration is trying to figure out how to change the behavior without escalation. So what I just described before was to, they respect power. So that's in conflict with changing behavior without escalation because typically administrations will take a weaker position because they don't want to upset the Russians, where they would, where they would escalate if we are viewed as doing something too heavy-handed. So those two positions are in conflict. But if you do something over time and you see that it's not working, where you're taking a weaker hand and maybe taking economic sanctions or backing off, taking doing things that you would normally do with other countries because you don't trust that Putin's going to act rationally, then you find yourself always coming in weak, right? So what happens is you end up capitulating and allowing the Russians to do what they want to do and continue with their bad behavior. So the one thing I would say is we have to change our policy dynamic, our policy playbook on how we manage and address the Russians. We have to come in with a more powerful position using, all the instruments of government, in my view, rather
Um,
than
oh,
like
sorry about that. Yeah.
there's the military, there's the diplomatic, there's the intelligence piece. You have to bring all those things together, and it's a challenge. It's hard.
Do, do
I,
do we need do we need to appear strong on the world stage in order to do that?
Absolutely, absolutely. They, Putin sees weakness, and he seizes on that. Um, I think he saw an opportunity in Crimea. And you could make, based on a lot of the stuff that's been reported, our government at the time was really trying to cut a deal with the Russians in Syria, right? To stop the violence in Syria. The Russians kind of, bogarted their way to the negotiating table at the behest of Assad. If you guys recall that time frame, it was a very violent time with the Syrians, use of chemical weapons, a lot going on, and we were trying to negotiate a deal. And it's almost as if we looked the other way in Crimea because we didn't want to upset the Russians or the opportunity to close that deal. And when we did, what was it, a couple weeks later, the Russians bombed a humanitarian convoy going into Syria and said, and that undermined and everything was off the table after that.
Yeah.
But again, if again, look at the history of how the Russians operate. They respect power.
Yeah. Kayla Davis or Kala, I'm not sure. Thank you very much. And I'm gonna ask her a question, but obviously feel free to answer, don't answer, throw in hypotheticals or possibilities to your level of comfort.
No.
Are Ukrainian soft really operating outside of Ukraine in the Middle East and Africa?
Again, I retired in 2020.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'll go ahead and field that one. No,
Yeah.
those are private groups. It is not Ukrainian soft that's doing that. Any other questions for Pat?
That's it.
I got a couple from Ed Bogan.
Okay.
Uh-oh.
Yeah.
Time in Panama when you're no.
Ed had some stories. Yeah.
He wants to go back to 9/11. Back to the day itself, we were in operations training class that finished just before that. It was actually June of 2001. What did that moment represent for you?
Yeah, what a great question. And it's not unique to me. I think a lot of people, it represented, kind of the worst day in America. It was a watershed moment. I remember, I remember, the day it happened, and, we were told to evacuate the building and get out. And if anybody's familiar where headquarters is, there's two main roads. There's 123 that runs parallel, and the GW Parkway, the George Washington Parkway, and both those run into Washington. So it's the only two outlets to get out. And the parking lot, once 9/11 happened, all of Washington was trying to evacuate out of Washington. Cell phones didn't work. We were told to evacuate. So basically, me and a couple of Ed and our classmates went out to our vehicles, and we couldn't leave the parking lot because the GW Parkway and 123, the two parallel roads, the only exit and entrance into the agency were parking lots. So you couldn't leave the parking lot of the agency because it was so backed up, everybody trying to get out. So everybody would just say, get away from the building, get away from the building. There's more planes out there. And I just sat at my car with friends, with classmates, listening to the radio because you couldn't make any phone calls. And I just remember that moment, how powerful it was. Like, we are under attack. The world just changed today. And the F-16s are flying over. The Pentagon was burning. The World Trade Centers had fallen. And my life and of my friends and my colleagues, of Ed, everybody that worked there, it changed that day. And the stark difference, as I mentioned earlier, between that day and the next day coming into work, where suddenly, there was offices, they were just saying, okay, you are no longer working, pick your issue, counterproliferation. You're no longer working Korea. You are now chopped to CT. There's mattresses in the hallway, and the mindset changed, and people really took it personally that this happened on our watch. And what do we do to make sure, one, it never happens again, and two, let's prosecute this now so that our kids don't have to do it. So it changed the world, and it changed all of us that were working there. I'll tell you that. And Ed's a hero. If you listen to his story, there's a lot he didn't say. I think he's waiting a little bit to get it out. But when he does tell his story, he's one of the true heroes in the post 9/11 hero.
And Ed, if you don't tell it here first, we're coming for you.
Anything else there, D?
Yeah, we got one more from Ed. He's getting greedy. Going back to Coast, we had a lot of successes taking it to Al Qaeda in the first 7 or so years of the GWAT, but admittedly not at the same level we would have in 2010 and 2011. Was Coast a wake-up call? How did Coast impact you as someone who was in the fight for years before and then after?
Yeah, Ed and I both had friends that were lost in Coast. So it was personal. There was a sense of it being personal on 9/11. And then, a few years later when Coast happened, it was very personal. And, that drive to get to senior Al Qaeda leadership was already there. But once Coast happened, it just, it was like another round of steroid injections into the arm of CIA and specifically the Counterterrorist Center. And the folks that were involved in that really took it to heart. And Ed, frankly, was the one driving that, both from the main office and from the field. And there was kind of a unwritten but personal, I'll say vendetta.
Yeah.
And I'm using that word purposely, to get the folks that did that. And we collectively did.
We'll have to have you and Ed on together, maybe in studio sometime.
And if you guys haven't seen it, please do watch Ed's episode. It's phenomenal. It's episode 292 on the Team House. Would you say, that happened in 2009, right? Would you say, so, the GWAT was, there were, with the military specifically, I don't know that there were really firm goals about how we win, what the definition of winning was. And I think that everybody just kind of got into I don't want to say a rut, but a cycle, right, of just prosecuting targets. Would you say that the Chapman attack the Coast attack was like a shot in the arm in terms of just getting out of the daily grind of it?
It crystallized the mission even more. There's always this, mission creep combined with mission fatigue.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I think that event just crystallized the mission even more. And again, it was a shot in the arm. And it affected our tradecraft, how we did business. Like I said, when I was in South Asia, again, with all due respect, people like me, people like Ed, we did that meeting 100 times over, where you were meeting with somebody that wasn't vetted coming into the gate, or going outside the gate and meeting somebody like that, because we were so desperately trying to find intelligence that would lead us up that pyramid to Al Qaeda leadership. So it was a risky business. It just caught up with us in that one time.
Yeah.
But it was a stark reminder of, hey, let's take a step back. Let's think about our tradecraft a little bit, but at the same time, let's get after it. Let's exact revenge for the folks that did this, and make sure that we were able to remove the people behind this from the battlefield as part of our process of working up the chain to bin Laden.
Yeah.
So I want to let people know we'll be back on Tuesday with Chris, Army veteran, and he's the host of Task and Purpose's YouTube channel. And then on Friday, we'll have Justin. He's 5th Special Forces Group guy. And then on Monday, the 21st, is David McCloskey. Will be here talking about his new book. So that's what's coming up the next couple episodes. I should also, I would be remiss if I didn't tell people, we Defy, the Lost Chapters of Special Forces History. My book is coming out December 9th. It is up on Amazon for pre-order now. Please check it out if you haven't already. Pat, thank you for joining us this evening. I mean, is there any final thoughts or anything that you wanted to put out before we get going?
No, just thanks for the opportunity. Really an honor to be here to engage with you guys and talk with you guys. And again, I go back to what I started first. Hopefully, there's something about my journey that might inspire folks or help people who are thinking about getting into the national security space, and maybe it would help them want to raise their hand and join. But again, I'll say it's an honorable profession. There is a misperception of what is being portrayed on television and movies, but it's good people, honorable people with a tremendous amount of integrity, who at the end of the day are trying to protect our homeland and our national security interests.
Pat, if somebody's watching this, and let's say they're not, some 18-year-old or 22-year-old college student, but let's say they're 30, is there still a place for them in the agency?
Yeah, there is. The agency, depending on what you want to do, the agency has carpenters, plumbers, support people, tech people, software developers, people that make batteries, people that do operations, people that do analysis, people, that brief the president, people that serve meals. It's not just about, being a case officer. It really is a team effort that is behind the machine that makes it all work. So there's a lot of opportunity. If you go to the website,
doctors, psychologists.
Yeah, I forgot about those. Doctors,
Yeah.
psychologists, great people, lawyers. Yeah, there's a lot of lawyers, maybe too many lawyers, but there's a lot of lawyers there.
Yeah. So hey,
Yeah,
if
but
you apply to the CIA, tell me you heard about it on the Team House. Maybe
That's
we'll
right.
get
That's
maybe we'll
right.
get a
You
referral bonus.
Get a referral fee. That's right. Yeah, it's a great place to work.
Well, thank you for sharing your story with us, Pat, and we'd love to have you back sometime.
No, thanks, man. I really enjoyed it. It was great talking to you guys, wonderful conversation. Some of my friends were putting me up to this, like Mark Polymeropoulos and stuff. So I'll have to ask him how I did. I was a little bit nervous coming into it, but you guys make it easy and make it a conversation. So thank you.
Oh, yeah, absolutely, Pat. Really appreciate it, man. And so we'll see everybody on Tuesday and then again on Friday. Have a good weekend, everyone. We'll see you next time.
All right. Thanks, guys.